Okay, so yeah, good evening, everybody. My name is Allie Cordemonch. I am a wildlife biologist with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department here in Jackson. And as part of my, well, basically all of my duties are to monitor and manage all aspects of our ungulate populations here in Jackson. So that's all of our hooved animals. So things like elk, bison, bighorn sheep, deer, mountain goats, etc., and moose, of course. So wanted to share some information with you all tonight. This will kind of be a presentation that touches on a lot of different aspects of moose here in Jackson Hole, as well as a little bit of identification training for people who are going to be participating in Moose Day on Saturday to hopefully help you guys out. If my slide will advance, there we go. So there's 4 different subspecies of moose in North America, and their ranges are shown in these 4 different kind of shades and shapes here on the map on the right. And the subspecies that we have here in Wyoming is called the Cyrus Moose, and it's actually the smallest body size of all of the 4 subspecies of moose in North America. So a bit smaller than moose you would find in Alaska or moose you might find in Maine, where I'm from. Usually about body size for bulls is going to be about 800 to 1,200 pounds, and cows about 700 to 1,000 pounds. So small for moose, but definitely a large animal still. And a lot of people might not know that moose are a fairly recent arrival to Wyoming and to the Jackson Hole area. So they weren't here when the first settlers arrived a couple hundred years ago. Cyrus moose actually naturally expanded their range to the south from Canada through Montana into Yellowstone National Park in the late 1800s. And then they colonized Jackson Hole by about 1912. And after that, after kind of the first moose were recorded in Jackson, the population increased really rapidly. And so historically, surveys documented up to 40 moose per square mile on their winter range, which is much, much denser than what we see today. So another note, we actually have 2 different moose herds here in the Jackson area. So this map here, you can see the orange area depicts the range of what we call the Jackson herd, the Jackson moose herd. And then the purple is kind of the northern portion of what we call the sublet moose herd. And you can see that little text box there, kind of where my cursor is, which is basically the town of Jackson. So we're kind of sitting right where those 2 herds meet. And we know that there's moose that go back and forth between the 2 herds, but you might hear, different people refer to the Jackson herd, which is mostly from kind of the town of Jackson, Highway 22 to the north, and then the sublet herd is to the south of us. And mostly tonight, I'll mostly be talking about the Jackson herd. So a little bit about moose, kind of Moose Ecology 101. Here we are now in the winter, and this is really the time of year when moose thrive. So this is an animal, as you guys saw on the map, we're kind of at the very southern extent of their range. So this is a species that really thrives in northern climates, boreal type of environments, deep snow, cold temperatures. And so they, in those days when it's really cold, really deep snow, for us that might be uncomfortable, those are the days when moose are really loving it out there. So they're an animal that has obviously a really, really big body, so they can hold heat really well. And then they have really long legs for moving through that deep snow. And in the wintertime, they almost primarily eat willows. So that's really their major food source, is different species of willows. They'll also eat different types of woody, kind of other woody species. So things like aspen, chokecherry, They'll even eat like subalpine fir, conifer branches. Basically, you know, they're surviving off of, yeah, like dried twigs and wood, basically, which is pretty amazing. Then moving kind of into the late winter when things, you know, start to warm up a little bit, that's the time of year when we do see moose starting to struggle around here. So we'll get quite a few calls of, you know, moose coming into town. They look a little rough. You know, they've made it through that whole winter. They're kind of in their poorest condition of the year. So this is kind of a tough time for them in late winter. And that's the time of year, you know, kind of like March, late March, early April, when we really encourage people, especially to like give moose plenty of space, you know, don't be kind of pushing them around on trails or things like that, because they're really trying to survive that last piece of winter. And then when spring comes, you know, that's a great time of year for moose. That's when things start greening up. Life is good. They shed that winter coat. And this is the time of year when the calves are born. So usually calves are born in kind of mid to late May. And moose can have either 1 or 2 calves. So they're one of the few ungulate species around here that can produce twins. And typically we see that, you know, cows are able to produce twins when conditions are really perfect. So they're in very good nutritional shape. You know, they can carry a lot of fat on their body and have enough resources to provide for themselves and for 2 youngsters. So around here in Jackson, it's actually pretty rare to see a moose with twins. I mean, relatively, like we just are finishing up some of our helicopter surveys this week for moose, and I think we've seen just 3 pairs of twins so far. So it is a pretty rare thing to see twins around here. And then going into the summer and the fall, you know, again, this is kind of the time of year when moose are making their living. They're just eating, trying to put on a lot of fat to prepare them to go into that next winter. And then of course the calves are growing. They're trying to grow as much as possible so that they can go into that winter in the best condition possible in order to survive. And then in the fall, this is when the breeding season happens. And this is the time of year when, like, especially around here, we see, you know, typically moose are pretty much a solitary animal. You know, they might be in groups of 2s or 3s, but it's really rare to see like a herd of moose, like you'd see a herd of elk. But the exception is in the fall when they group up for the breeding season. And so this is really common. You know, I think a lot of you have seen this out in the Antelope Flats area in Grand Teton National Park. It's a pretty cool sight to see moose grouping up, feeding on bitter brush and breeding during the fall. So that's a little bit about kind of basic moose ecology. I wanted to share a little bit more about the Jackson moose herd in particular and kind of how our moose are doing around here. So like I said earlier, you know, moose arrived to Jackson Hole kind of in the early 1900s. The population took off and increased really rapidly. In the 1980s, this graph shows the number of moose that were being counted in that Jackson moose herd with our helicopter surveys at the time. So every winter, Game and Fish goes out and flies in a helicopter over all the main moose winter ranges and counts moose once a year to kind of get a population survey. And so you can see, like on the left side of this graph, kind of in the 1980s, at the time the biologist was counting about 1,000 moose up to like 1,200 moose one year. And then, you know, you'll see that there's been a pretty steady decline since that time. So the herd really kind of hit bottom in about, 2010, 2011 so is kind of when we hit that bottom. And then ever since then, we've kind of just been flat at these lower numbers, hovering between about 250 moose to 350 moose counted every year. So we've kind of plateaued at these lower numbers. The other metric that we look at is something that we call the calf-cow ratio in the herd. And so this is basically the number of calves that we see per 100 cows in the herd. And so you can see again, kind of over that similar time period, every year it fluctuates a little bit, but, there's kind of a general decline in the 90s into the early 2000s, hitting a low of about 15 calves per 100 cows, which is pretty darn low for an ungulate population. But since then, we've seen that calf ratio steadily increase. So that's a really promising thing, probably one of the only promising things we're seeing with moose around here. And so that calf ratio has climbed back up, which is really good. So for us, I mean, that means that there's more calves that are surviving, through the summer, through the fall, through the winter. By the time we survey them, they're almost a year old. And so there's more calves surviving. It's just going to take probably some time for those calves to grow up and add to the population. But we're hoping that more calves are going to lead to a growing population in the future. And then the other thing that we measure is the bull to cow ratio. And so this is the same kind of idea. This is the number of bulls to 100 cows. And so again, it kind of jumps around every year a little bit for various reasons. But what we have seen is in more recent years, we're hovering around about 70 to 90 bulls per 100 cows. So it's almost a 1-to-1 ratio, just below a 1-to-1 ratio. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people ask us, because we do have some moose hunting that is still allowed in the Jackson moose herd. And this is the reason why we do allow some hunting, because we have quite a few bulls in the herd to females. And the more males we have, that's more moose that are competing. Bulls are competing with those females for food and space. And so we don't really want too many bulls out there. We really want to prioritize females and calves. So that's one of the reasons why we do have some limited hunting. So yeah, why did this moose herd decline? Why is it kind of stuck at these low numbers? Kind of like with a lot of wildlife situations, there's no one answer or no one reason. There's a whole host of reasons, unfortunately. So a few of the ones that we know of for sure that I'll go into more detail on is that number one, there's been some pretty major changes to moose habitat around here in both their summer and their winter ranges. So the 1988 fires that occurred in Yellowstone and the Teton Wilderness, those affected the Jackson moose herd extensively. It affected their summer range primarily. And then of course their winter ranges have been impacted both by kind of human development, residential development on their winter ranges, as well as some historical competition with elk, competition with cattle for some of that winter range habitat. The other big factor is expansion of grizzly bears, increase of grizzly bears, and then reintroduction and expansion of wolves, both of which are major predators on moose and especially moose calves. And then effects of long-term drought on habitat. And then the big one that I'll talk a little bit more about tonight is warming temperatures and climate change is really impacting moose in our area. And related to that, there's a number of different parasites and diseases that we're seeing increase in prevalence around here, probably related to climate change. And those are carotid artery worms, winter ticks, and a couple other diseases. And then of course, one that we see really, up close and clearly here living in town is vehicle collisions with moose. So I mentioned climate change and warming temperatures. So I mentioned earlier that, moose are a species that really thrive in kind of cold, boreal, northern type environments. And so they can actually they actually don't deal very well with heat. And so in the winter time, when they have their thick winter coat on, they can actually become heat stressed at temperatures over 23 degrees Fahrenheit. So, you know, this past week, it's been pretty chilly. They're probably a bit more comfortable, but, you know, those days earlier on that we had that were in the 30s or maybe even 40 degrees, you know, moose are not doing very well in those situations. They're heat stressed. They're having to spend a lot of energy just trying to cool down and not move around, not increase their heat very much. And then in the summertime, you know, moose shed that winter coat. They put on a thinner summer coat, but they can still become heat stressed at temperatures over 59 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, where we have, you know, summer temperatures around here, sometimes stretch, you know, in the 80s for quite a long time, definitely the 70s. So moose are having a very hard time in those temperatures. So you all might have heard a little bit about this project. We've initiated a project collaring moose in this area. We've been collaring moose kind of in the Wilson West Bank kind of Highway 22 area for the last few years. And this is the first time we've ever put tracking collars on moose kind of down near Jackson and near Wilson. And so it's pretty exciting. We're learning a lot about how moose move and particularly how they cross roads in the area and how they live in these residential areas amongst people. And so, yeah, we've been doing this project for 3 years, and this is a map showing all of the moose movement data we've gotten so far from this project. So each different color represents an individual moose, and these are all adult female moose, all collared kind of within a couple miles of the Highway 390, Highway 22 intersection in the wintertime. And so you can see just how far some of these moose travel. A number of them travel north up into Grand Teton National Park. So there's a couple like that blue and kind of neon green one are in like Death Canyon, Open Canyon area up in Grand Teton. And then you can see there's one that went a little crazy and went all the way kind of into the upper right corner of this map. So she went all the way almost up to like Togety Pass area, spent a few days up there, turned around and came back. So yeah, some pretty interesting movements of moose that, you know, live with us down here in the wintertime, and then a lot of them leave in the summertime. One of the things we've learned is that about 50% of the moose we've collared are migratory, and about 50% of them are not. So about 50% of them just kind of live in the valley year round, and then 50% of them migrate out in the summertime. And the other really important thing from this research, one of the main objectives was to learn where and when and how frequently moose are crossing roads. And so this is a map showing just one moose. So she's in purple. These are all of her movements. And this map, you can see the Snake River running through there. And then just to the left of the river, kind of in the center of the map, is the Highway 390, Highway 22 intersection right there by Stilson. And so, yeah, this moose has really taught us a lot about, you know, where and how frequently and what time of year she crosses the roads in this area. So this type of information is directly applicable to things like designing wildlife crossings around roads. So this information is being put directly into a YDOT project that you all may have heard of in this area to put in wildlife underpasses. So yeah, moving on, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of the diseases and parasites that we're seeing here in our moose, because some of them are things that you all may see or signs of that you may see when you're observing moose. And so the first one that we have is called carotid artery worm. And this is caused by a parasitic nematode, so a worm. The actual name of the worm is Elaeophora schneideri. So you may hear people refer to it as just Elaeophora, a moose with Elaeophora, etc. And this is a parasite that gets into the moose from a horsefly. So a horsefly will bite the moose, basically inject the larvae of this worm into the moose. And then the worm goes through its life cycle, becomes an adult worm in the moose, in the bloodstream. And the worms are they're like a few inches long. They're about the width of like a pencil lead. And so they're pretty visible. And they travel through the bloodstream. They try to get to the head. So basically they can get taken up by a horsefly again off of the moose's head. But unfortunately, moose have this kind of funky shape in their carotid arteries in their neck, where there's this turn in the carotid artery that this worm can't really negotiate very well. And so it kind of gets blocked up and builds up in these masses in the carotid arteries. And that's what's shown in the lower right, is this is a mass of a bunch of worms from a moose that got blocked in the artery. And so when these worms build up and block the artery, it can affect, as you would think, the blood supply to the head. So the blood supply to the ears, the eyes, the face, the brain, etc., is all impaired. And this can cause blindness. It can cause decreased neurological function. We see moose kind of wandering in circles, doing kind of funky things. And if they get a high enough load of these parasites, it can actually lead to their death. So this is something that we're monitoring and tracking in the Jackson moose herd. And this is something you all can help us with, because oftentimes, you know, as you would think, if there's decreased blood flow to the head, one of the things that happens is that in the wintertime, if there's not enough blood flow to the ears, the ear tips of the moose will get frozen and get frostbite and actually fall off. And so we'll see moose that look like this, that have these cropped tips to their ears. So this is a sign that they might have carotid artery worms. So anytime you guys see moose that have kind of this flat ear, if you can make the note for us in your observation, that's really helpful. And then the next one that I wanted to talk about, a lot of people are seeing moose with this winter, is winter ticks. So basically this is just an excessive tick load on moose. And it's a specific kind of tick, actually called a winter tick. Dermacenter albopictus is the scientific name. And basically what happens is in the fall, moose pick up these ticks while they're walking around through vegetation. So the ticks attach to the moose in the fall, and then they live on the moose all winter long. So they don't fall off, they just stay living in their hair, on their skin. And then usually about this time of year or into March, they'll start feeding. And so the upper right picture is what they look like when they start feeding and they become engorged with blood. So they're pretty big. And, you know, once they start feeding, you know, the moose, it just causes a lot of itching, a lot of irritation. And so the moose just is constantly rubbing and scratching and trying to get the ticks off. And when they rub and scratch and everything like that, they end up breaking off the guard hairs on their coat, which are those dark brown outer hairs that we normally see. And once those are broken off, instead we see that like lighter gray, whitish undercoat, which is closer to their skin. And, you know, if there's enough ticks and the moose rubs off enough hair, the things that we worry about is hypothermia, because they've, you know, rubbed off a lot of their coat. It gets cold, it's hard for them to stay warm. And then also, you know, it's hard to believe, but having like tens of thousands of ticks on you, sucking your blood, especially for a small moose like a calf, it can cause severe anemia and weight loss and potentially death. Usually the adults can survive, but we have been seeing more mortality in the calves due to winter ticks. So this is kind of what moose might look like that you might see. So one thing, again, on Moose Day, or, you know, for nature mapping anytime, if you see a moose that has hair loss like this, so you can kind of see You know, the one on the left, it started rubbing like its shoulder, that the outer hair is rubbed off and it has that bare patch. So that's definitely winter ticks. The one on the right is also winter ticks. That's much more severe, where she's rubbed off, you know, almost her entire brown outer coat is gone. So that's definitely more severe. But yeah, if you guys see anything like this, if you can make a note of it in your observation, if you could take a photo, that's even better. Because again, this is something that we're trying to track. It's something that really has only taken off in the last 5 to 10 years. So it's something we're trying to get a lot more information on. And then the last one I just wanted to touch on is called ruminitis, or renal failure, kidney failure caused by backyard feeding. Unfortunately, it seems like a lot of people in Jackson now are feeding moose in their backyards, which I think a lot of people, you know, want to help moose and maybe feel bad for them in the wintertime, but we're seeing a lot of negative impacts on moose from being fed various things in people's backyards that they really shouldn't be eating. And so, you know, people are feeding them things, you know, like grain, horse grain, corn, alfalfa, things like that, that really are not moose food. So like I said earlier, you know, moose are adapted to living off of willows and like basically eating twigs and whatnot in the wintertime. So their gut and their digestive system is adapted to that. And if suddenly, you know, they start eating something really different, it can cause a lot of issues. And so we have had a number of moose die the last few winters that we've linked to backyard feeding, where basically it's caused kidney failure, a lot of issues in the rumen itself, in the digestive system, kind of chronic inflammation from eating things they shouldn't be eating. So yeah, just a plea for don't backyard feed moose, or tell all your friends not to feed them. So yeah, just a lot of issues. The other thing we see in this lower right photograph is sometimes we see hoof deformities that are caused by, again, kind of changes in their diet, imbalances in minerals, and it can cause a lot of hoof issues as well. Okay, so getting on to something happier, Moose Day, which is what I think a lot of you are here for. So I just wanted to kind of talk about how Moose Day folds in with kind of our larger management of the Jackson moose herd. And so here's a map from last year, from 2021. And what this is showing is the red dots are where, when I go out and survey moose in the helicopter for the Jackson herd, the red dots are where we found moose from the helicopter during our survey. And then the blue dots are places where people found moose during Moose Day. And what I hope you can see is that there's a lot of areas, you know, particularly around town, where, you know, we don't survey from the helicopter because, you know, people don't really like us like zooming around their houses at low elevation all the time, you know, particularly on like a Sunday morning or something. So we don't survey some of the residential areas. And so it's really helpful. Like you can see that a lot of moose were detected by Moose Day volunteers in areas where we did not detect them from the helicopter. So it's just a really cool way that we can combine all of this data and hopefully get a really good picture of what's going on with the herd as a whole. So yeah, a little bit about moose identification for Moose Day. So a couple different things, and Hillary, help me if I say anything wrong here, but usually what we like you to do for Moose Day is to try to classify the age of the moose, if you can tell. So it would be an adult moose would be anything basically over 1 year old. So yeah, 2 years old and older all counts as an adult. And then a juvenile moose is a calf. So that's anything that's basically 0 to 1 year old. So, you know, this time of year, it's the calves that were born last spring that are kind of coming up onto their first birthday. Those will be classified as a juvenile. And then, of course, if you can't tell the age, putting unknown is completely acceptable. And then the other thing is to try to determine the sex, whether it's a male or female. And again, if you can't tell, writing unknown is perfectly acceptable. We'd rather you write unknown than just guess. And then, yeah, please include notes, please include photos. Those are always really helpful when we're reviewing the data to try to, you know, make sure that it's what you saw, you know, we know what you saw, we know where you saw it, all that good stuff. All right, so a little bit on identification. So here's an example of a moose you might see. So there's kind of two main ways that you can tell the sex of a moose, whether it's male or female. One of the ways is to get a view of it from behind like this. And so the female will have hopefully this really clear white patch on her backside. We call it the vulva patch. And a male basically would just be all dark brown or black from the back. So if you see that white patch, it's a female. So for this one, I would classify this as an adult because she's pretty big body size, adult, female, and then 1. All right, here's another example. So again, we can see the moose on the right is pretty big. The moose on the left is much smaller. And again, this is in the fall, so this is going to be a cow with her calf in the fall. So we would classify this one. So the first one would be an adult, female. And again, you can see kind of that lighter colored patch, the vulva patch. 1. And then just a reminder that in the nature mapping form, so you can put in that first one, and then you can choose to add another to the same observation. And so the second one would be a juvenile, so the calf. And again, that's a female, so you can even see on the juveniles that small light patch. So you should be able to tell male or female on the juveniles. And then quantity is 1 for that one. All right, here's another example. So you guys might not, you might not always get a perfect view of the moose from all sides, right? So sometimes you might have to just kind of make your best guess. But, you know, the one on the left, I would say is pretty big. The one on the right is substantially smaller. Can't really see, you know, the vulva patch, can't really see behind them. So I guess I would say, again, this is kind of your judgment call. So the one on the left, I would say it's an adult because it's big. I'm going to guess it's a female because this is probably most likely a cow and her calf. So pretty safe to say this is a female. If you're not sure, you can always put unknown and then 1. And then again, we can click to add another. And then the second one would be a juvenile. Can't tell the sex on this one because we can't see behind it. So unknown, don't know if it's a male or a female, and 1. All right, here's a couple more. So again, remember this time of year, pretty much all of the males have shed their antlers. So you can't rely on antlers to tell you if it's a male or a female. So one way is to look for that vulva patch on the backside. Another way is if you can get a good look at the head, is you can look to see if there's this antler scar. If you guys can see my cursor there. So kind of between the eye and the ear on a male, you'll see this, what we call the antler scar, which is where the base of the antler is from where it fell off. So that would be, again, an adult, male. So yeah, here's another example. Again, maybe we can't see the backside of the moose, but we get a really good look at the head. And we're looking for that to see if there's any sort of antler scar. And on this one, I don't see anything between the eye and the ear. I just see fur. So this one, no antler scar. So this would be an adult female. All right, last one. Here's one. We're can't see it from behind. Maybe you don't, I'm not sure in this photo if you can really see the antler scar very well or not. So yeah, if you're seeing one from far away, you can't really tell. I would say this is an adult unknown. You can always just put, yeah, unknown age, unknown sex, one moose. That's totally fine as well. Okay. Hopefully that made sense. Last thing, this is the last slide. I just wanted to share one more plug for those of you that own hammocks. In the fall, please take your hammocks down because every fall we get bull moose that are in the rut, that are kind of crazy, hyped up on testosterone. They love to rub their antlers on everything. And every fall we probably get like 4, 5, 6 bull moose that we get calls on that we have to go and dart to get out of hammocks. So here's a couple bull moose from the past couple of years that have been tangled up in hammocks. So please take your hammocks down in the fall. I think that's it. Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you so much, Allie. I did see several questions coming into the chat, so I think I'll read you the question and then you can go ahead and answer it. Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first question from Chuck Harris says, Allie, we recently witnessed magpies in close friendly proximity to a bedded mom and calf, apparently feeding on ticks. How common is that, and could we partner with the Raptor Center to train this behavior with a nice smiley face?
Oh, I love that idea. That's thinking outside the box. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great observation. Yes, a lot of times magpies will definitely be following moose around this year and this time of year, and either like picking ticks off of them, or this is the time of year when like those engorged ticks are also kind of falling off on their own on the ground. And so magpies will pick them up off the ground and eat them. So yeah, that's kind of a secret. Like when I'm trying to go find moose to like dart and put collars on, if I see like some magpies fly up, I'm like, ooh, there might be a moose right there. Cause yeah, a lot of times they hang out by the moose. Yeah, we know. So like most of our moose probably have 10,000 ticks on them, on like one individual moose. So maybe we just need to like increase the magpie population because they have a lot of ticks to eat.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. Chuck also asked, why is it thought that moose were such late arrivals to Jacksonville?
Yeah, great question. I don't know the answer to that. You know, I think there's some maybe speculation that, you know, back in the 1800s, there were several really large wildfires in the area that kind of, you know, knocked back a lot of the mature forest, created a lot of younger growth, aspen, you know, types of food that moose really like. So I think there's some thought that maybe that allowed moose to, you know, expand into the area and take advantage of that new habitat that was created. But yeah, I don't know if anyone really knows the answer to that.
Awesome. Okay, and then we have another question from Jeanette, I think, saying, what is the approximate survival rate for calves through the winter?
Ooh, great question. I don't know off the top of my head. That's one of the things, the other plug I would make. So that's one of the things we're trying to track with this collaring study that we're doing. So we're trying to, basically we're tracking the females over time, and every spring we try to, observe each of our collared females to see if they have a calf, how many they have. Do they have one or two? And then kind of re-observe them several times throughout the year to see if that calf is still with them. And so one of the things that actually nature mappers are really helpful with is if it's hard for us to find these moose sometimes because they're in residential areas, they're hard to see, they're on private property where we might not have permission to go. And so like if a nature mapper sees a collared moose, if they can, write down, so each one has a unique colored and numbered tag on their collar that you should be able to see. And so if you can write down, like I saw yellow number 18 and she had a calf, or she had two calves, that's super helpful for us to, or like she didn't have a calf. We might be like, oh, she had a calf a month ago, but now she doesn't have one anymore. So that's super helpful information. Yeah, I don't know the survival rate. I feel like that's something we probably need to get more information on.
Awesome, thank you. And then Pam says, what is the preferred ratio of bulls to cows?
Yeah, so I would say it varies. It totally depends, but I would say a ratio of more like 50 bulls per 100 cows would probably be something we would like to shoot for. In our elk herds, we usually have ratios of about 20 to 25 bulls per 100 cows is what we manage for. In moose, we like it to see it a little bit higher than that. But yeah, our ratios right now of like 70 to 90 is pretty high. And the other thing that can lead to is, bulls competing during the rut, during the breeding season for cows. Like I'm sure some of you have seen that, like it can get pretty intense. And, if there's one cow that's getting pursued by a lot of bulls, like multiple bulls for a long time, that can also not be very good for the females, to have to kind of constantly be spending all of this energy, during the breeding season, basically to like get away from every single bull that tries to, breed with her.
Wow, yeah. Awesome. Well, Mary Lynn says, has climate change affected the life cycle or the life of these ticks? Do they usually die with colder weather?
Yeah, that's another great question. Yeah, so there's still a lot we don't know about winter ticks. There's been a fair amount of research in the east, kind of in the northeast. There really hasn't been hardly any research on ticks in the west. And so there's a couple different projects going on now in western states. Ours is one of them. There's still a lot we don't know. But basically what the research is pointing to so far is that what can really drive the number of ticks that get on moose is, how do I describe it? Like basically the length of the fall. So like the earlier it snows, the better, because basically once it snows, it kind of like shuts the ticks down and they can't get on moose anymore. So the ticks kind of rely on like grass and other vegetation that like sticks up in the fall. So they climb up and like climb up to the tippy top of grass and whatnot and try to get on a moose. And so once it snows and like all that grass kind of gets laid down, it kind of like shuts off it's called the questing period, when ticks are trying to get on a moose in the fall. And so the earlier it snows, the better, because that just shuts that off. So yeah, some of these falls that we've had where, it doesn't really snow very much. It's 50 degrees in October, 50 degrees in November. That just allows more and more and more ticks to get on moose during that period. So the research is pointing to that as kind of the major driver.
Wow. And so let's see, Mary Lynn also had a question about what are people specifically feeding moose that negatively impacts them?
Yeah, I mean, almost anything. So, like I said, I mean, moose just have a really specialized digestive system basically in order to live off of and process like branches and twigs and wood in their diet. And so they have like a very specific like microbiome basically in their gut that does all of that. And so that, all that gut bacteria that's specialized for digesting wood is not like, can't digest anything that's like much richer and kind of more sugary, more nutritious, hay, even like grass hay, alfalfa, grain, anything like that, apples, carrots, things like that. It's just like, they just can't digest it very well, and it causes all sorts of issues. And it's really interesting because, we've done necropsies, basically the same as an autopsy, but on wildlife, it's called a necropsy. We've done a lot of necropsies on moose that look like, from the outside, they look completely fine. And once we open them up, it's like their digestive system just looks awful. And it's because they've been eating all this stuff that they're just not built to be eating. So yeah, we've seen people feeding them all sorts of different things that just aren't good for them.
Okay. And then SLM says number 75 has been in B recently with one calf. So that's really great information. Thank you so much. And then Anna Kirkpatrick, it looks like, has a story. I don't know how much of a question this is, but it says, last year we had a moose in the neighborhood who was pooping horse-like size poop. We knew it wasn't a horse because of the moose tracks around the poop. When they called Game and Fish and Game, they said it was most likely a moose had gotten into the grain. We then started seeing a moose lying near the frozen creek, and it never got up. It died, and Fish and Game came out and removed it and told us that the cause of death was most likely rumen acidosis based on the poop. It was sad, but very interesting, and we never saw that type of poop again. So.
Yep, that's a very good, yep, that's an example.
Yep, a good reason to not feed moose or any wildlife. And then John Norton does have a question about what time of year do the antlers start to emerge? This was my question too.
Oh yeah, good question. Usually it really varies based on the individual moose, but usually in the springtime. So, it takes a lot of energy, as you might think, like it takes a lot of energy for a moose to grow those antlers. And so they really, coming out of the tail end of winter, they don't have much extra resources and reserves, body reserves to do that. And so it really starts like in the spring, once food becomes more plentiful and they can start kind of replenishing themselves with some better forage, and that's when they can start putting energy into antler growth. So it really varies, but usually like May is when you start seeing some good nubs, sometimes earlier than that.
Awesome. SLM says, to clarify, it's bar B bar. That was where the person saw the moose. And then I think it's Jeanette says, Allie, a cow was collared in our yard recently. Wow. We continue to have a collared cow calf in the area, but they do not specifically come into our yard. Perhaps they have PTSD. Her collar number is 70 or 71.
Nice. I hope they don't have too much PTSD. It's going to be nice.
Well, I think that's all the questions that I'm seeing in the chat. So hopefully everyone got their questions answered. And another just huge thank you, Allie, for being here tonight and sharing this with us. And I think Frances does have about 12 minutes, she said, of information to share about the nature mapping protocols for Moose Day. So we will move on to that now, if that's all for you, Allie.
And Allie,
Yeah.
I'm going to have a question or two about, if you have a few more minutes to stay on, about protocols on Moose Day. So if you can hang in there a little bit longer, that would be great. Is that okay? Okay, terrific. I guess I'm going to go share my screen. Let's see. Desktop, share. Let's see, there we go. Okay. All righty, folks, here we go. Again, thank you all for participating in Moose Day. This is a really exciting, fun event for people, especially in middle of February. I'm Frances Clark. I'm the one who's been corresponding with most of you who are participating in Moose Day. I appreciate all your patience and willingness to serve, so to speak. And so thank you for being here. Let's see how to do this. Again, the intention of Moose Day is to find moose and to complement the work that Allie has done with her helicopters. And again, we get to see under the bushes. We get to see it more on the private property, as was indicated by the maps that Allie showed. And so just know that what you're doing is really important. A brief overview, again, it's all very clear that this really is a very important collaboration with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department with Allie as the lead. And just so you can see the bigger picture of things, we are surveying both in Teton County, both in Wyoming and Idaho. And this is the big map. Many of you have been given your little parcel pieces of maps, but this is what it all sort of goes to, from the northern end of Teton National Park out to the Gros Ventre, which is done on snowmobile by some of the U.S. Forest Service people, all the way down a little bit down south of Hoback, depending on how many people we have to help survey. And fortunately this year we do. The other map that I wanted to show you is a new map that has just been put together by Hillary Turner, and we're trying to scope out some new canyons areas that are still within Wyoming and still within, well, still in Teton County, but really sort of over the line here. And so here you can see those areas that we have several new teams that are participating in that. And I have us starting back in 2011 for our first Moose Day, which makes us about the 11th. But we should probably double check our records on that because we seem to have two different numbers there. And again, I just wanted to let you know that it's not only game and fish that are out there and the time that Allie has been putting into this, but the Forest Service people send out a good contingent of people all the way down the Gros Ventre. We have participants of staff from the Grand Teton National Park, and they're donating their time on Saturday morning as well as over 90 volunteers of you folks who are helping us out. So thank you. But this gives you a little bit of the scale of the operation. So getting ready. Many of you have been sent all this information, but I just thought it would be helpful just to go through it. I sent you information that's under confirmation details from Moose Day. Some of you got it 1 or 2 weeks ago, some just very recently, but do go back and make sure you have that. Review the maps of the areas you're going to be covering, the protocols I sent out. And make sure also you open up your nature mapping entry form. That's your backup system. Very, very old fashioned, but it can work. Be sure you can log in. Please test your login over as soon as possible so that if there is a problem, you can let Hillary know and she can help you with that. Okay. And also make sure that the Moose Day green button is on your screen. Hillary should have gotten most of that done today, but make sure it is there. And again, Hillary is the person to contact with the login issue and or the no Moose Day button for you. And the Moose Day button is only going to be going to the nature mappers who are certified, just so everybody's clear on that. Okay, we have a certified nature mapper for every team, and so you may end up being the one responsible for doing the entry. And then I really suggest you print out your maps, your observation form, your protocols, just so you have them handy. And those of you who have park permits, please print those out and carry them as well. And then I have something down here, which I can't quite read. Sorry.
It says check in with your team, Francis.
Yes, thank you, but it's blocked by the little row of things underneath. So, make sure you're all set to go on Saturday. I know some of you are just with household members or whatever, but some of you have bigger teammates, and just make sure you know if you're going to be rendezvousing with others, where that's going to be and what time it is. So just make sure you're all coordinated. Oh, dear. Okay. Sorry about my screen jumping back and forth. There we go. Okay, on basic protocols, safety first. Okay, it doesn't seem like we're gonna have a blizzard, but it could be cold. So really watch out for yourself in that regard. We have you surveying in teams of 2 or more. There's a reason for this. One is for safety, particularly if somebody's trying to drive and scout. We need 2 people, one person to drive and the other person to scout and take down the data. The other thing is, if you're skiing, we want you to have a partner out there. You're doing this under the auspices of the Jacksonville Wildlife Foundation, and so we feel that's a responsibility to make sure you're safe. Use your car signs, print those out unless you're skiing. They look like this. Put them on both sides of your car and maybe in the back. Just make sure they're not blocking your view for scouting. But this helps people know if you're driving in private developments that you've got the slow car driving by, you've got people peering out with binoculars. It's a good idea that they know quite what's going on. We've made every effort to contact the HOAs and whatnot, which are feeling particularly private. And this will also help people know what's going on. And again, just use your safety common sense out there, please. Respect the moose. Don't disturb them. Of course, we're trying to help them. We're trying not to agitate them. Also, very important, respect the homeowners or the property owners. You are ambassadors for Moose Day, which puts you under the auspices of Jacksonville Wildlife Foundation, as well as Wyoming Game and Fish. And I think you all understand you don't want people wandering on your property, staring in your windows with binoculars in hand. So if you're doing a driving route, you be welcome to go down the development roads, but please don't go tucking down into private driveways unless you know the person and have given them a little bit of an alert that you're coming. And if you've got friends in the neighborhood, terrific, and you can get them scouting for you too, so you can come check them out. Okay, another protocol. Some people are saying, can we do it the next day or in the afternoon or whatever? We really want you to be doing it from 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. This is the protocol we've been following all these years. This is what makes the data comparable from one year to the next. Okay, survey only your area. You have received maps. This is one nice clear one, and stay within your territory. You know, we're really not covering the territory further up and away that's not outlined for your territory. Now, sometimes you may see one right over the line. You're just not sure. You're not sure whether the other team is going to pick it up. You can put it in, but just really make a note saying out of territory, and make sure you have the time and the location really, really precise. And this way we'll know if there's any duplicates. Okay. So just really your responsibility is your territory. We have other people carrying the other areas as well. Okay. Go through it once. You know, you don't have to spend all morning looking for moose. Drive the little roads, ski your territory. And if you don't see anything, you don't see anything. The only exception to that, as I would say, is if you see sign of recent moose signs, some tracks or whatnot, and maybe it's behind the house, you may not see it because you can't go down that driveway because it's private property, but you may want to come around again and see if that moose has moved. Okay, so basically though, your obligation is to go through it once. And just given that, it may not take all morning. Some of you have smaller territories, some of you have much greater distances to go. So just take what it takes and not to worry if you aren't filling the full time. The obligation is to cover the territory. And this is just another map. Some of you have been sent maps that may have 2 different territories for 2 different people. And I tried to outline that when I sent you out the details for confirmation. So please pay attention to that so you don't waste your time covering the wrong area. Okay. Look for tracks. Again, how do you find these moose? Tracks, scat, browsing evidence. These are all helpful hints for you. Some of these may be way too old, but some of them could be looking pretty fresh that morning. And so please see what you can see. Take a little extra effort. Whereas you may see a big field and there's, you know, there's no tracks whatsoever. So that's not going to be moose territory. Concentrate on other areas. And this is where I have a question for Allie, is how and when do we include sign, or do we include sign? Do we want just the big moose?
Oh yeah. I would say go ahead and record it if you'd like. We probably won't use it in the official count, but I'd say record it because it's always good to get in the database. Great,
thank you. So this is under another category in your on your data entry, okay? For sign, S-I-G-N, sign.
But we still want to report it in the Moose Day project, correct?
Yes,
not casual observation.
Yeah, I gotta get there in a sec.
Okay.
So that's what we want. And then you're also welcome, and I hope you will, nature map other critters, because some of you are not going to find moose. I'm sorry, you're not necessarily going to find moose. You may have had moose there the day before, and they're not going to be there. Us veterans know that moose disappear on Moose Day. But have fun. Go, you know, if you got the ravens flying over the magpies, you see the bald eagles, take your time to nature map them. And add that to the importance of your day. We really, really appreciate that, okay? But then the key thing here is your moose go under Moose Day. Only moose go under Moose Day, and only moose that are seen that morning between 7 a.m. and noontime. Okay, that's the most important thing. And then again, other sightings are most welcome, but they go under casual observations. So that's one of the key things to remember. All right. And then the other thing which Allie had mentioned before, look for the loss of hair, for possible ticks, record that under notes. The split ears, or ears that are sort of shortened like, or sort of cut off like that. Those could be the carotid artery worms that Allie was showing us, really gruesome looking things. And but we would love to know what the condition of these moose is, if you can notice anything particular like that. Okay. I do have sent you out the backup form. This is the old form. We used to have to do everything by hand. We don't now because the entry form has gotten so sophisticated. But again, it's the time, and try to be as precise as possible. The name, the sex, the age, the quantity, the activities, if it's, hopefully it's alive, especially on Moose Day. And then you could key it into your map by putting a number on the map where it is, and that sort of thing. Or if you are out in the boondocks and you're using a GPS or the Gaia, you can make note there. But this is your backup form if you're sort of out of touch. And then you can